On the 1st of January 1909, something happened for the first time in British history. The government agreed to redistribute taxes to support people in their old age. On that day, more than any other, the modern welfare state began, in earnest. The rules were simple. Men aged 70 and above could claim between 2 and 5 shillings per week from the government. But for all the positive press and good feeling, the government wasn't really making that big a financial commitment, because back then the average working man could only expect to live to 48 years of age. That's the equivalent of offering someone a pension today, but only when they reach the ripe old age of 115. So the idea of rewarding anyone who made it to 70 with a handout from the public purse seemed perfectly fair, and more importantly for the government, cheap. It was a perfectly workable policy, but few politicians realized that they were setting in motion a sequence of events that would inevitably lead to the crisis Britain faces now. And let's not forget, at the beginning of the 20th century, Britain still had a booming overseas empire. It had yet to fight in the cripplingly expensive First World War. The economy was on a seemingly permanent upward trajectory. And the idea that Britain could face any kind of decline, financial or otherwise, had not yet entered mainstream thinking. We could afford to pay for a welfare state, so why shouldn't we implement it? But there was one problem. Now the welfare state had started, no one had any idea where it would stop, or whether it could actually be stopped if it became unaffordable. We'd created a trap for ourselves, then stepped right into it. It wasn't until the Second World War was finally over that the welfare state really began to grow. Welfare was seen as a major part of winning the peace, keeping the forces of socialism and fascism at bay. Of course, politicians soon realized welfare wasn't just a tool to win the peace. It was also incredibly effective at winning votes, too. This same scenario came to be repeated across the world, in the USA, Japan, and across Europe. Seemingly limitless economic growth and prosperity allowed politicians to make an essentially unlimited promise. The government promised to look after you from cradle to grave. This single, powerful idea gave government the license to swell to a size unimaginable just half a century earlier. The promises got bigger, and so did the cost. In just a few short years, the size of the welfare state grew almost uncontrollably in a flurry of new laws. There was the Butler Act, which reformed schooling, the Family Allowance Act, the National Insurance Act, the National Health Act. The list went on. The problem was, this all came with a nasty side effect. It was immensely expensive. Everyone assumed we'd be able to pay for it forever, but they were wrong. Politicians found themselves totally and utterly caught in this trap. Any attempt to reduce the size of the welfare state was met with often violent resistance in the form of strikes and protests. Or the party trying to cut back, to do the sensible thing, was simply voted out of power. After all, an ever-growing proportion of the population now benefited from the welfare state in one way or another. The safety net couldn't just be pulled away. The government would forever be saddled with an expense that could only grow. And grow it did. Since public pensions were first introduced, average life expectancy has grown from 48 to 80, a 67% increase. But the age at which we retire has remained essentially the same. This has resulted in an estimated £5 trillion worth of pension promises the state has made to its citizens, roughly 5 times what our entire economy is worth. No one has any idea how we'll pay these. The recent attempts by the government to change the retirement age don't go anywhere near solving the problem. As people have lived longer, the strain on the NHS, the demand for medication, more doctors, nurses and other staff, as well as a skyrocketing cost of caring for the elderly, has pushed our finances to breaking point. In fact, as state spending has grown, so has the cost of running the welfare system itself. For instance, the state employs 500,000 civil servants. To put that into perspective, during the height of the British Empire, when Britain ran a quarter of the planet, the state employed just 4,000 civil servants. If you're in any doubt just how out of control state spending has become, simply take a look at this. As you can see, spending has exploded in a way no one could have imagined 100 years ago. With the idea of welfare being such a vote winner, no government could take the bull by the horns and cut it back, not in any meaningful way. They could fiddle round the edges and save a few pennies here and there, but as population grew larger and lived longer, all they could really do was sit back and let a future generation sort it out. And now it's come down to us. In 2012, for example, the government spent roughly £120 billion more than it collects in taxes.